Welcome to the Established Podcast. Conversations with founders, investors, and changemakers shaping the future. Each episode uncovers the stories and lessons driving today's innovation economy. Powered by Established, we spark innovation and build connections that matter through strategy, storytelling, events, community building, investment programs, and more. Now, let's dive in.
Hello, welcome to the Established Podcast. I'm Frank Gruber, your host, also the co-founder of Established and managing partner of Established Ventures. Today, I'm super excited for our guest, David Douglas Stone. David is a serial entrepreneur. He's an investor. He's an advisor. He's a champion for Maine startups, the Maine startup ecosystem. And he's also done some amazing things here in Maine. He co-founded the company CashStar, which was actually acquired for $178 million in 2017. He's also the founder of Forager, where he spent a decade building and advising that company. And he's just been doing some great stuff in the state for a long time. So David, super excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frank. Super excited to be here, and accolades out to you too for coming to Maine and bringing your expertise and your entourage and all the talent and background that you have. We need more people like you in the state, and we're lucky to have you. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let's dive right in. For people that don't, haven't maybe been following your story the whole time, you built multiple companies, including CashStar, which was, did billions in transaction volume. And when you look back, what's the thread that connected everything that you've built?
Yeah, threads are interesting things. I grew up in Worcester, Mass, and I was the youngest of four boys. And my father was a doctor, and my brothers all became doctors. So it wasn't for me. So I had to kind of cut my own path, if you will, and choose my own road, if you will. Early on I'll go quickly here. I developed a real passion for politics, believe it or not. Kind of felt like I could maybe change the world, make it a better place. I'll come back to that because that's kind of circular in terms of where I am. And, I modeled my background on international politics and got a graduate degree in international relations. And, I worked for the Foreign Service and during the Cold War and the Congressional Research Service and, tried my best. And I even had a grant in graduate school to go work on the stationing of intermediate nuclear weapons in Germany. And I finally this isn't me. It's not what I want to do. I'm too creative. It's too much a mold. So, I ended up, focusing myself on international business and wrote my master's in banking deregulation 9 years ago. And then went to work for American Express, and I spent 14 years there. I realized, after starting in strategy and planning that I was, more creative, and more of an entrepreneur, although we didn't call it that in those days. So I think, without going through all my history here, because I don't want to bore people, I think what I learned along the way, and it took me a while really to figure out, I think that everyone in this world has talent and skills, right? We all do, right? Some of them are very obvious, great speakers, great doctors, great artists, great CEOs, poets, artists. But even the most common person has some talent. And discovering, and I use this when I interview the hundreds of people I've hired over the years, and trying to discover that is kind of life's work. Like, what am I good at? Like, what are my gifts? And if they resonate with you and you actually, enjoy that skill set, then that becomes very fulfilling. And what you really want to try to do is this concept of mastery, right? Like, if you're really talented, you're a piano player or a writer or an entrepreneur or, running a large enterprise that brings people together around tech like you want to then hone it and master it. And that becomes the most fulfilling vocation that you can do in your life. Unfortunately, a lot of people never figure it out. And I'll say one more thing. And I had all these Davidisms at CashStar, and people would quote me, but I always used to say that if you love what you do and you do what you love, everything else takes care of itself. So that's probably the thread. And for me, that's the sort of the axiom. And for me, I learned that humbly that I'm a market intuitive by nature. and that I tend to see, trends before most people, sometimes too early. And I have a lot of scars and arrows from all of that. And if the trend resonates with me, I look for either the barrier or the opportunity to unlock that market. And ultimately, you know, develop a concept and test it and hire, the best kind of talent. I sometimes call it rogue talent in the early days of a startup, because you need people that are willing to fly with you, take risks with you, see in the dark, see around corners, be patient, ride the roller coaster, as we like to say. And then, the greatest joy for me, and I've done it, many times, is to see that concept, that alchemy come together and actually see behavior change amongst consumers and users, actually see the shift away from what they were doing before to what is happening now. And that's been probably the most fulfilling journey that I've had in my career.
You mentioned these shifts and you're able to see these things early. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing now, or maybe some of the other examples that you've seen over time?
Wow. Well, that's yeah. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Well, that's okay. One question we didn't prepare for. So
that's okay.
I mean, I don't know where to take this, because we could talk for hours, because there are so many. I do have still a passion around politics, and as you may know, I've been involved in the campaigns. You sort of have these, if we stay at a global level, and then we can drill down into more of the tech side, but you sort of have these 3 or 4 horsemen now. The global instability, the environmental, challenges with the forest fires, and we tend to minimize this stuff, because we're not seeing it right here. And this, and sort of the healthcare crisis around all the aging baby boomers and them needing so much more medical. And then last but not least, of course, AI, the dawn of AI. So you have all of these forces sort of, flying around us, and it's a confusing time for a lot of people, and particularly for young people. Again, I think it was very different when I was growing up. You got a job, you worked hard, you had a family, you had kids, and you kind of put your head down. And now there are so many extraneous forces which we have no control over, right? And it's a I don't want to say precarious, but it's an uncertain time. And now, if you want to drill down a little bit. There's been so much written about AI, and I've talked about AI at length. And, I think that, like most technological shifts, we really don't know what the outcome is going to be, and how it's going to transform us. I think we could do a whole podcast on AI, but that, I think, is the most important change in the tech field. Again, this is nothing new. And I think there's a lot of confusion about, is it a tool? Is it an end unto itself? Is it, some, dystopian, sentient, evil, phenomena? I think we're all sort of grappling with it. We were going to get this at the end of my notes here, and I have more notes on this. But that's kind of what I'm thinking about. All of these forces playing out, and they're all interconnected, right? You have the Trump administration, trying to figure out a strategy for AI, and then it's affecting us because there's data centers which are tied to the environment. This is what I mean. It's all. Then you got drone warfare, which is using more and more AI and robotics and that. So I don't want to get kind of crazy with you now, because that's where I'll go. Right. But those are
I get it 100%. Let's dive back to take us back a little bit more about entrepreneurship, dive back into that conversation. So I want to talk more about CashStar and maybe your origin of how you're at Amex. You've been doing the stuff there for over a decade. What kind of pulled you into entrepreneurship in the first place? What was kind of the thing that made you you were an entrepreneur, right? And then what made you jump?
Yeah, I've written a lot about this in some of the magazines, and when I covered my story here, but probably the first time, again, I had to cut my own path. I started a high school canteen in my high school. There was a store like half a mile away, and a lot of the kids would go there, play hooky, and I convinced the school that, I'll start a canteen and I'll donate, half the profits to the school. They're all for it. And the thing was such a huge success. We had lines out the door, and finally the parents got mad and, shut it down. But it was like incredibly successful.
Yeah.
So, in American Express, again, humbly, I had the good fortune of being made a product manager when I was 24 or 25 years old. And I, was able to create, a slew of new services, including one that was written about by Tom Peters, if you remember who that guy was. Wrote many books about entrepreneurship. And it was, it wasn't my idea, but I had implemented. It was, delivering traveler's checks within 3 hours to anybody anywhere in the United States. And there was no FedEx or UPS in those days. And it's legal tender. So where do you store it? How do you get it to someone? They're going to run a $10 million TV commercial. It better work. And then I had the opportunity, it wasn't in my portfolio, but I created the second prepaid currency in the world, the American Express gift check, which was, the first time you could actually send someone a gift as a monetary value and use it just like a traveler's check in the real world. So that was a big deal. I was 25. And then I got a little bored. They made me a vice president. I was one of the youngest vice presidents in the company at 29. And then I decided to go to Asia, which was the Wild West in those days, where, payment systems were pretty nascent. And I had 33 countries I covered. I was never home. And, I played a fairly significant role in helping kind of introduce payment instruments, some digitization of the way that we process credit cards and all of that. If you remember the paper receipts, that we had in the old days, you'd go and collect paper receipts from the merchants. You'd bring them somewhere. They'd be counted manually. So I did a lot of work there. And so I realized I was, be much more of an entrepreneur than say a standard. And then what happened is, they wanted me to stay out there after 4 years, and I had another baby out there. My kids were young. I wanted to come home. And they didn't want me to come home, and I wanted to come home. So I came back and I got a job as VP of technology strategies worldwide. And then they sent me back to Asia to basically re-engineer. I was head of marketing and sales, re-engineer to save money. And basically I had to go and fire people, and it was not fun. Consolidate data centers, try to find ways to streamline it. It wasn't what I wanted. So I moved on from there. And then, I almost took a job with an internet startup in 1995. An ISP, actually. I don't know if your listeners know what an ISP is. You worked for one, right? Were you there at AOL when they were an ISP, or were you there?
No, I wasn't, but I know what you're talking about.
All right. Well, basically, for people that don't know, it was basically you had to have a system, a ramp, if you will, to get on the internet. So you had to go through like a gateway. It's not called that, and you had to sign up for an AOL or somebody else to do that. So I ended up selling my soul to a big insurance company in Chicago as an executive vice president with a car and country club and, parking garage. And I tried to change the insurance industry single-handedly and, go direct to consumer and do all this stuff. And I crashed and burned after 7 months. It was not for me. I couldn't be an entrepreneur. It was just too difficult. And I'll never forget, one of the guys in the Midwest said to me, that was the senior vice president there, said, "Hey, Dave, you're like a Maserati. They hired you so they could take you out and drive you out on Sunday, but they don't want you to do anything." Just like we hired our American Express hot, commodity, but, we don't want you to get anything done. Because as soon as I started getting stuff done, the knives came out. So after that, I actually moved my family back from Chicago and took a job at an internet startup. In 1996, it was, dial-up modems. Nobody knew what the internet was. And it was a paid search model. And, I was fortunate. I worked with the three of the founders. One was a very successful IBM guy. One was a guy that helped build up a number of the desktop applications for Microsoft back in the day. And the other guy was the first person that invented a network called Bang and Vine. So it was like, even though I took a huge cut in salary, it was like, every day I was like in heaven. But unfortunately,
the internet, that was exciting.
It was exciting, but unfortunately, the paid search model just wasn't something someone was going to do. And the writing was on the wall, and ultimately I left, and I was a hot commodity, and I had a lot of opportunities to work in startups. And then I got recruited by a company called Unum. And originally it was a big insurance company. I said, no, I don't want to do insurance. And they kept wooing me and begging me to come. And they gave me this portfolio of, we'll give you $10 million, build us some new businesses, put us on the internet. There was no transactions. It were just flat pages, like 4 flat pages. So I decided to jump at it and move to Maine. That's how I got here. Part of my aspirations when I was younger was to become like a CEO of a major corporation. And so at Unum, which was one of the top 100 companies in the United States at that point, was the best performing stock on the S&P for a while. It was one of the first companies to go public in the insurance. They were a really innovative company. And for a while, it was a lot of fun. But, and I was one of the first 2 companies in the world to sell insurance products on the internet. Nobody thought I could do it. They literally didn't think we didn't sell a lot. We sold like 20 products. Okay. But no one thought we could do it. So pretty exciting. And then they did a big merger and they offered, there was like 18 senior vice presidents, and they offered us packages, and they offered me 2 years of pay. So I left. And then I said, I'm going to do a startup in Maine. This is the CashStar story. I'm going to do a startup in Maine. It's what I want to do, and everybody told me it was impossible. I must have talked to 50 people, dug up all lobster traps and, went on trails and markets. Everybody said, there's not enough talent. There's not enough capital. You're never going to get it done. So, after 1999, I worked away for 8 years, everywhere from Boston twice, where I worked for a VC. I worked for the Boston Red Sox for a year. I ran a joint venture in the UK in Manchester, England, with all the mass transit companies as my partners. I had a big team in Perth, Australia at one point, in the mass transit smart ticketing industry. I worked in the micropayments industry in Boston for a year and a half. So I was never home, basically. And I would go on the road sometimes for 6 weeks, and leave my family. And I did 12 around the world trips in 18 months. And the company actually was losing $200 million a year. So it's a whole other story for another day. So it was a really interesting journey. But all this time I kept saying to myself, I want to come back to Maine. I want to prove all these naysayers wrong. I want to build a company here, that, will be highly respected, that will attract talent, will let people grow, young people, and give them the opportunity to really experience, the emerging tech world. Long story short here, or short story long, when I was doing some consulting for Intel Capital and mobile couponing, before mobile phones were really smartphones, they were still feature phones, I met the CEO, founder of coupons.com. And we talked, and he said, hey, I have this concept, which we tested a little bit, which was to use coupons as a payment instrument. So instead of sending, you a coupon to get $5 off of, Crest toothpaste, his idea was let's put money into a barcode and allow someone to print it out and cash it. And they had tested it in the casino industry in Australia and then closed it down. He basically offered me the job with hardly anything. I met with, his primary investor, the hedge fund guy. Our vision was, we're going to build a new payment network that, allows you to basically send monetary value over the internet, print it out, and use it in the real world. And if you remember at those times, you could use your credit cards in the physical world. If you wanted to buy something online, you had PayPal. But if you wanted to send somebody money in those days, you either had to send him a check, send him a wire, right? Or give him cash. There was no other way to do it. Right? I mean, you couldn't even, there was nothing. So if you needed money, so the original concept was we were going to build the third or fourth, depending on how you want to do it, payment system. So they gave me $3 million with no business plan. They met me, and so I went back to Maine, hired a handful of people, and really good people. It was rock and roll. And then the Great Recession came as I was building this company. All right. And I had to go back to my investors and say, look, guys, PayPal spent $200 million. And that was, 15 years ago, to build to build their company, and they had a flywheel, which everybody needs, which was eBay. They didn't succeed until eBay sort of took off. And if you guys want to be patient and invest $100 million, I'm all in. So they were like, well, no, we're not going to do that. So I narrowed the focus to gift cards, which was about $100 billion plastic industry. And, most popular gift in the world. But, you had to buy a piece of plastic and either send it in the mail or bring it to someone. And I'm like, this isn't convenient. What if I want to send someone a gift 3 days before Christmas, or I forget their birthday and I need to send them a gift, or I want to customize it and, do something with it. So we created a platform that basically would allow anybody anywhere to send a gift from wasn't any device in those days, but that was the vision for any device, anytime, with a lot of personalization anywhere in the world. And so we set off to do that.
Wow. Billions of transactions later.
Yeah. Billions.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, it's such a need. It's still a need today. I think there's, obviously, a lot of different players have jumped in that space, but it's really something that you kind of were ahead of that game as far as that goes.
We were the first kind of digital currency in the market. There wasn't really anything else at that stage. And there was nothing you could use to connect the online to the physical world. There was no products. There was nothing.
Right. That's great. Okay, so let's think back. What was like, as you're obviously building a startup in Maine, it can be difficult to begin with, right? Just because of lack of potential capital, resources, you want to call it. It's getting much better, but it still not as vibrant as like a Silicon Valley kind of place, or maybe even Boston. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the hardest moments building that company?
Two come to mind. One was, we're building this system and, we had no customers and we finally got a small pilot here in Maine, Gorham Bike and Ski. We sort of sweet talked them into it because there's a standard sort of paint by numbers way to build a startup, and I won't go through that today. It's pretty obvious to me, and I think it's gotten more obvious to most people. But anyway, you need a first client, right? And so suddenly it's like, and then we actually got a real client, Pizza Uno, which I got through a connection. And suddenly there's like, oh God, the engineering team, there's three of them. We got to build a product. We got to make this thing work, and so they're freaking out. And then I had to get a payment processor to how are we going to move money? Right. Frank, you're going to buy a gift card online for Pizza Uno and you want to send it to your mother. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got to store value somewhere in the internet, on the cloud. And then that person has got to get that money and it's got to work in the real world. Right. It sounds simple, right? But the cloud is barely there. There's no mobile phones. Bluetooth doesn't exist. So it's kind of like, what are you going to do? So I couldn't get a payment processor. Visa or MasterCard said to me, what are you, crazy? You're going to send unsecured money over the internet and allow someone to print it down? We'll never allow it. And I must have talked to 30 different. Finally, I found a little payment process here in Maine, and they said they would take the risk with me because it's, fraud, like huge amounts of fraud. And that's a whole lot.
Yeah,
that's another whole story where I almost had to close the company when we were defrauded. So that was one thing. And then the second thing was because the Great Recession came, I had a head of sales who was one of the best people I've ever had, actually. I was the initial salesperson, but I finally hired someone and he wasn't able to close any accounts. And it was Christmas and we were up in Detroit and it was freaking freezing cold. We were visiting with Barnes & Noble. That's where their headquarters was. And it was a cold, gray day. And it was like 6 degrees. And we got to the airport. It was like the 20th December. I said, Phil, if you don't sign an account by the end of January, I'm going to have to let you go. And I'm going to have to hunker this company down and, really pull back because, we only have like $1 million of capital left. And it was really tough. I'm telling him that, and that was really, really hard. But ultimately he signed CVS and then Chili's and it all sort of took off from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Awesome. And I wonder if it was that motivation or if those were already in path.
I think it was his motivation. He was an amazing salesperson and he still calls me all the time. Hey, Stone, don't you have another startup in you? Don't you have another startup in you?
Do you have another startup in you?
Well, this is a whole other discussion and around, are you the General MacArthur type where old soldiers fade away, right?
Mhm.
Or are you someone that, as a serial entrepreneur, having been in 12 startups and not most of them weren't my own. Um, uh, so I don't know. I mean, I've been toying, as you know, with one. I have two other ideas that I think are really great ideas. But for me, I'm sort of a person that's all in. And for me to be able at this stage of my life to, say I'm only going to work 10 hours a week and let others do it, it's just really hard for me.
Well, what makes you decide now? Like, what makes you decide what's worth your time and energy now versus back before, I guess?
Well, I've always been so driven. I like to say I was a type A, but not in a
Hmm.
good way, or a type A plus, right?
Hmm.
Not in a good way, right?
Hmm.
Like, being a B plus is good enough.
Hmm.
So that's a concern of mine. Yeah, even for this podcast, like my girlfriend's like, why are you, writing? You know all this stuff, David. So I wrote, I got 12 pages of notes. I rewrote them. It's like, I don't need to do it. I'm not even looking at them, right?
No.
So I don't know. I don't know. I think this is a great question for people who have been a serial entrepreneur. I mean, what you typically want to do, I just know it's enough for me, is sit on boards and consult and mentor and,
Yeah.
speak. And that's kind of the journey I'm on. And it's kind of why I'm working with you. Um,
Hmm.
so I can't say categorically that I want to do, I do want to do another startup, but I don't want to, because I had no life, before. I lived on the road. Um,
Yeah.
I worked 80 hours a week. I was on my laptop at midnight doing emails. I mean, you know how it is.
Yeah.
And I don't, it's, life gets more fleeting as you get older. So I don't want to, and then anything I do, I really want it to have a social impact. I don't want to keep taking and burning, burning resources and having more toys. And, it's at the end of the day, when I did my around the world trip for myself, 79 days after CashStar, you realize at the end of the day, when you're at your funeral, and what are people going to say about you? Oh, David had a Maserati. I don't, or, he had the most beautiful house in Maine. Well, great. I mean, that's not what you want them to say about you, right? They want to say, that he
You do have
did.
a nice home, though. I mean,
Right. But
it's
in the
true.
end of the day, they're physical things.
Right.
They're not your legacy. Right. So as
Yeah.
you get older, you tend to think more about it. So, Forager was an attempt at that. We tried to revolutionize the local, change the largest industry in the world, the food industry, which is trillions and trillions of dollars. It's not it's the least digitized industry still in the world. And I had a vision for, digitizing the supply chain so you could buy more local food. But it was a bit like Don Quixote, to be honest with you. I mean, we got to $8 million in volume, and had, 200 farms and 30 grocers on our platform. But I couldn't get the scale that I needed. It just was, really difficult to build scale.
It's like one by one by one by one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. It's hard to do.
And that's a whole other story. I lived so many iterations of that company. I must have had 4 or 5 different staffs in those 9 years, and,
Wow.
down to 3 people, raise more money, up to 10, down to 3, up to 10. I mean,
Well,
and I
yeah.
stuck with it and stuck with it and stuck with it.
Yeah.
And, if you're an entrepreneur, 9 years, dog years, being an entrepreneur is like dog years. So that's like 63
That's
years.
a very time. That's a very long time. Wow.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the next shift right now, because I feel like it's, right in this, we're in one
Yeah.
right now with AI, and I want to talk a little bit more about that because you've some pieces that are out there. Maine Business Journal has them posted as well. Can you share a little bit more? You've seen a couple different waves as well, right?
Yes. When I was at graduate school, I went over to Harvard and took one of the first computing courses, had to learn BASIC and we had to take home these computers and dial into the mainframe with a phone coupler. So, if you think about, technology, I'm talking about, more technology, not technology that's like, medicine or the
Yeah.
wheel or the combustion engine. The first thing it was all back office. It was all,
Right.
processing and storing data, and then it moved sort of into the front office with productivity when, Microsoft platforms came out and Excel and, all of the, and, all of those documents sort of into the front office. And then eventually it moved into the sort of the retail space with point of sale systems and checkout. And then, the next wave really was the internet, right? Where information became widely available to everybody, and there was connectivity, right? And getting to AI, Masashi's son, who was the founder of SoftBank. Are you familiar with SoftBank out of Japan? He recently said about a year ago that AI is 50 times the potential, 50 of the internet. I mean, that is an order of magnitude. And then you had social, come in, which really was much more about connectivity and information sharing and sort of building digital relationships. I mean,
but powerful. We've seen revolutions happen because of social media, right? Like we've seen that happen. So if you're saying it's 50 times more powerful than the internet, that's a lot.
Well, that's Masashi's son.
Right. No, he's saying that even. I mean, that's a big
well, it is because unlike, and then you got mobility, right? Which was, changed a lot, the age of mobility. And now you're getting closer to, as I like to say, and I've said this for years, it's moved from the back office to the front office to the point of sale to the consumer. And the next stage, it's going to be in the consumer. It's going to be part of you, in you, whether it's, optical or headsets or fingers or that's the next stage with the technology.
Or in our brain.
Right. The technology, as Ray Kurzweil says, the singularity, he wrote about that in the 90s, man and machine can become one.
Well, I mean, they think in the last year that might have happened. So, I mean, it's possible.
So that is, you can, you remember all the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and all the rest of it, but that is really happening now. Drone warfare, robotics. So I sort of say that most tech has, in the past has served a specific market need in some way. You can argue about social, but it was a way to connect people in ways that you never connected before. And you can argue about that. And really the ability to reach larger audiences. But AI is just like tech for tech, right? It doesn't have a specific market solution in mind. And it's pervasive across every segment. Right. Every single segment. And we don't have full control or visibility. Not that we had full control of social. Obviously we don't, but you had 3 or 4 companies or 2 companies really, frankly, that kind of manage those marketplaces. Whereas AI is its own kind of, I'm going to call it devil because it's not something that is controllable, necessarily. And it's kind of, I don't even know. It's more than the wild, wild west. I can't even find the right ways to articulate it. It is just profoundly different. And the potential for disruption and upheaval is pretty serious.
Yeah. I almost feel like it's death by 1,000 cuts. Let's just put it that way. Like you've got it's attacking all the different potential areas at one time. And I say attacking in a way, it's not like, I guess it is attacking. So like think about like publishing, right? Like you've got all these folks that have copyrighted materials, artists that have, books or songs or whatever, and all that's being ingested. And, these models can make books and music and all that just like that.
Yep.
And what did the producer get out of it? The creator?
And that's one of my, that's going to be one of my next articles. But Brett Stevens, New York Times writer on the conservative side, wrote an article today about, how, don't use AI to write. I mean, that was the basic thing he was saying, because just like everything, you're going to stop learning how to write. Right?
Yeah.
You're going to be relying. Your brain is not going to learn how to write anymore. It's kind of like spell check, right? But much worse. Or Google Maps, right? And I listened to a podcast a long time about Google Maps, how we've lost our ability to navigate. Like we were born innately with navigation, like, the animal kingdom, like birds and butterflies, right? We were born with that. And now, if you don't have Google Maps, people don't know where to go, right? So
drive right into the water.
Right, exactly. And I've actually in Europe sometimes been on Google Maps and you end up in a dead end somewhere and you have no more service, so you can't figure out how to get out of there. So always travel with a physical map. So the world of publishing, content creation, what is real, what's not real, who's writing something, and I'm struggling with this too. I mean, I really am.
We all are, because we know that it could save us time, and time is not replaceable. It really isn't. So I think that's what we're trying to fight against, I guess you could say. And so the minute you've got this fix that's simpler, we're attracted to that.
Right,
And
right.
that's
But the danger is you lose your voice, right?
100%. Yeah.
So I didn't use any AI for writing this.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
The articles I've written so far, I've used AI for some of it.
Mhm.
But I make sure I still have my voice in there.
Yeah.
But I'm going to write about, what is morality? What's gray?
Mhm.
How, how can you use it? And then
Right.
on the education, how do you teach now? I mean, I feel like education, because that's how we grow our next generation of people,
Mhm.
right? Education and family, right? And work. Those are kind of the three.
Well, you're seeing a pushback. You're seeing a pushback towards analog, because there's even studies that have shown that the kids that have been on like Chromebooks haven't learned as much
Right.
than the ones that have been
Right.
have write it out, like learn how to write and
Yeah.
by hand.
Yeah. And for years, our math scores and science scores have been going down.
Yep.
So I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, the obviously, again, I wrote about this in my last article, which hasn't been published yet, but where are the guardrails? Where's the oversight? Where is the policy? Where are the controls?
Mhm.
So
I mean,
anyway.
on one side, you don't want to hinder innovation, but at the same time, you don't want it to get out of control.
No, that's right. And so you need to set some parameters, some guidelines, and you need to put controls in place. There needs
Yeah.
to be a lot more testing. And I don't know how they do it, because everybody and their brother now, this is one of the, I think you asked me a question later, how can AI be used in Maine? I mean, the thing is now with AI, you can build a prototype, in a day, right? And it may work, it may not work. Probably not a lot of quality assurance. There could be rogue parts of it. So we're just
Building a startup now building a prototype. You can vibe code that in
right,
a few hours, and
right.
I went to school for computer science, so I used to
Oh, you
develop.
did? I didn't even know
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Wow.
So back in the day,
Did
I
you
would
write
actually
code?
code. Yes, I wrote code. But
Wow.
to do what, I used to, be able to do, and to do it now, it's like I can like talk to an AI to
Yeah.
help me get through it. Which
Yeah.
back in the day, it was like if I get stuck, I'd have to pull a book out and
Right.
like find a page that had some kind of reference to that, and it still wouldn't be 100% clear. And the fact that you can do that now with talking to somebody makes it so much easier that, everyone's getting into coding,
Right. And, again, back in the day when I was a student, right, I would go to the library and spend hours in the library, taking out books and periodical or reading microfiche. I don't know if anybody knows what that is anymore.
Yeah.
It was little like
Yep.
negatives that, and you had to use your brain a lot more because you had to piece things together and, do all the work. So,
Mhm.
I mean, and obviously our brains are getting rewired too, right?
Yeah. If you had to place your bet though in AI right now, and you could build something from scratch, where would you place, that AI bet?
Ooh, it's a tough one because again, I sort of believe that, I've always had this, and AI is different. This belief that, and I've, mentored many founders is, it's not about the tech. Okay. It's about, the market and the solution and what are you trying to solve? And it's a tool. Now you can say AI is, I have my own views on where it could help the most. I mean, obviously we already know that, productivity is a big deal and coding is a big deal. But again, I'm going to stay away from Maine right now. When we get to Maine, we can talk about it. But I mean, I think healthcare is probably one of the biggest and most positive areas it can help in. And there are many aspects, but one of the biggest challenge in healthcare, and I worked briefly in that space when I was in Cambridge. One of the biggest challenges with healthcare has always been data. Like the data is already in so many systems, right? The Holy Grail has always been like, how can we map all of your behavioral data, all your DNA, all of your, history of whatever illnesses and your environment and you have all, you might have x-rays here, you might have MRIs there and blood tests there and, psychology here. And there was this kind of no way to map it. So, using intelligent models and machine learning and all of that stuff, I think will make a big difference. on developing solutions and new drugs. I think, you know, I mean, you know, I think it's making doctors a lot more. I mean, every time I go somewhere now, I ask, you know, whether it's a dentist, doctor, a physical therapist, you know, how are you using AI? And, you know, you get a lot of the same responses. So it's making a very big difference there for sure. I think on the sort of more threatening side of the world, it's certainly playing a huge factor in sort of military strategy now more and more. The things that the Ukrainians are doing with robotics and drones are incredibly impressive. These drones are, you know, these robots are learning how to navigate the battlefield and how to avoid mines and, you know, go to the right place. And, you know, clearly that is going to happen. I think also for the aging population. I mean, Japan's done a lot of work here. You're going to see robotics really take off. Personal assistants, you know, for older people that, you know, can keep an eye on you and, you know, or service dogs that are actually, you know, robotic dogs. I mean, you may think I'm crazy. I always like to say that you have to be a little delusional to be an entrepreneur because, you know, people think you're crazy. And that was the same thing that happened with CashStar. When I tried to raise money in Silicon Valley, I think I kissed 1,000 frogs. I think I met with every major VC in the entire Silicon Valley. We have like 10 meetings a day. And early on, they'd always say to me, I don't think anybody's going to send a plastic gift. No one's going to send a gift card over the internet. That's crazy. It's not secure. People want a piece of plastic. Nobody could see it, you know,
Right.
and they couldn't
Let's
see
talk
it.
about capital for a second, because you just switched gears and started talking about capital raising.
Sure.
What signals tell you because you also were an investor as well, so she mentioned that. What signals tell you that a company is worth betting on? Like, what kind of things do you look for?
So, you know, I like to use Bill Gross, who started Idea Lab. I don't know if he's still around. I think they had 200 investments, a couple of home runs. And you know, and I asked this question: what you know, when you're looking at a startup, what is the most important ask? You know, what are the most key? What are the keys, right? And most people will say, oh, the founder, you know, the idea, the business plan, the size of the market, the TAM, whatever, right? You know, and he says it's market timing. Is the most, and he did an analysis of 200 companies, and the biggest factor was market timing. You know, are you too early? Are you too late? Or is it just right? Right?
Yeah, because you couldn't start the internet right now.
No, right?
That'd be terrible.
And all of the original search engines, whether it was Alta Vista or Yahoo or I can't remember the other ones, they all failed, right? They got a lot of traction early on, but they all eventually Netscape, you know, I mean, you know, Barstow made a lot of money, but a lot of these, you know, the very first, you know, Palm Pilot before there was an iPhone, you know, so market timing, you know, adoption. I mean, this has been my strength and my challenge is how do you get market adoption, right? How do you get people to change what they've been doing? You know, I mean, there is so much inertia in the marketplace. And to change behavior is very difficult. However, you know, AI is it's just slipped into everything. So it's almost like instead of being a pull, you know, which is I always feel is more important than a push strategy. You know, the old marketing is a push or pull, right? Are you pushing products on people through advertising or, you know, or digital or whatever, influencers. But AI has been a push model, which doesn't happen that often. And it's interesting because it's not being pulled by people, it's being pushed on you, you know, so everywhere you go, right? Like I now use the Google thing and every morning it gives me a list of all of the things I have to do and all of my calls and all of this and all of that. And it's being pushed on me. Now I could probably turn it off, right? But that means I have to opt out as opposed to opt in.
That's really interesting because it did start getting pushed. Like Siri was the first kind of AI that really pushed, right? And they're redoing it now, thankfully.
Thank God, it's horrible.
Never been quite right. But that's funny because they're now behind the curve of like AI, really. I mean, we're still early, but like, I guess they could get it right and knock everyone out of the park. But it's interesting that they were early and it didn't quite pick up like it is now because they didn't have the right thing. And now it's like they know where they're going kind of because they've seen now the other.
Apple was my client for a brief period of time. A really interesting company. I spent a bunch of time there in Cupertino, but Apple's always been much more of a hardware company in its roots than a software company. I mean, obviously, the whole OS they developed was pretty good, the user experience, but their roots have been in hardware, and they really
Yep.
fallen. I mean, I have to be honest. They really. I mean, if I wasn't tied to the Apple ecosystem, which is their strength, I would be using all Google and Android. I think it's much better.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, let's shift gears and talk about Maine and the ecosystem here. So you've built in Maine now, multiple companies. What advantages does a place like, let's say Portland, or you can go up the coast, even Freeport, or anywhere other places up the coast?
Okay, so I've been singing this siren song for a while, and so it's kind of like the Chinese character, or there's two sides to the coin, or danger. So people say we're too small a state, right? Yeah, but our size is actually an asset if it's leveraged, correctly, right? So we need to foster, as we're trying to do, a climate of intimate collaboration and healthy co-opetition. And because we don't have the critical mass, we need to be working much closer together, and having meetings together and salons and workshops and focusing on less things, right?
Mhm.
We need to really, have a strategic focus that you might not need in a larger, tech hub like Silicon Valley or New York, or in the old days, Research Triangle.
Yep.
I mean, Boston is well known for, biotech. New York used to be ad tech and a lot of that creative world. Silicon Valley, much bigger pond, so they could cover lots of things. You had Stanford. So Maine, really requires us to be more intimate. And I think we still lack that. I think we're still pretty siloed in a lot of ways.
I see that in other communities, like I've been all over the country, and
Yeah.
some of the more recent ones that have kind of exploded, like Austin, Texas.
Yeah, Austin, sure.
They're very welcoming of anybody that's
Right.
into that community versus being combative or even competitive with each other. Because at the end of the day, they know that if you're successful, I'm going to probably be more
Right.
successful.
And Maine has been somewhat of an insular place, people sort of keep their heads down, work hard. But there's
Mhm.
also, and I learned this at CashStar too, there's also, I don't know whether that's changing, because the state's changed a lot, but there's a lot of, I don't know, kind of down to earth integrity of our people here. We're known for being ethical and grounded and
Mhm.
service minded. And when we had Starbucks as our client, and we did a lot of volume with them, I mean, they took us over the top. And we're in the Guinness Book of World Records with Starbucks, by the way, for the largest online to offline promotion in the history of the world. Believe it or not.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, we sold 1.8. That we did a promotion. One of the things that happened and is we ended up using our gift cards as a promotional currency. So, but go to Gap and spend $100 and we'll give you an instant $25 gift card. We had a whole warranty service where rather than send you a new product, we would send you an instant gift card. I mean, and so we ran a promotion where Starbucks was trying to drive sales, and they offered you a $10 Starbucks gift card for $5. Right. And we ran it on social, not
Wow.
Groupon, but the other one.
Yeah.
And it got to 1.8 million transactions.
I do remember that, actually. That does ring a bell.
We got to 1.8 million transactions, and Starbucks said, sorry, sorry, you can edit that out. We better stop this thing. And it's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records.
That's
but Starbucks told us that we were the best vendor they had ever had in their lives.
Really, we didn't have too much left.
Well, I did want to say a couple more things about Maine. And
Yep.
I think, some of this is obvious. We need a larger pool of entrepreneurial talent. We're getting it, but, serial entrepreneurs keep doing the same thing. We need increased access to venture capital. And the only way you're going to get that is with more exits, because people need to see a return. We need enhanced synergy and joint efforts among our local investor groups. I always sort of wonder why couldn't the Maine Venture Fund and CEI and MTI, Maine Technologies, get together and say, okay, we have a pool of $50 million all in. They probably do, right? And fame, right? And rather than give out 5,000 here, 5,000 there, 10,000 here, why don't we pick, 5 companies that we can actually fund, with add-on rounds. So after we give them the first $250,000, we can give them another $1 million. We can give them another $1 million, rather than spread it out over 100 companies, so they can have a bigger impact. So that's really important. And we need to, build and elevate Maine as a brand where, entrepreneurs can be accessed and we can attract outside capital and outside talent, that this is a great place to actually build a startup.
Right.
Family, environment, school systems, crime, healthy food. I mean, there's just a lot of attributes that we have that aren't well known.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. It's a great place to live, so it makes a lot of sense. Why it could be a great startup hub for anybody to do anything. Obviously, with the connective tissue that you get to other places, you can start anywhere now. So,
right, that's correct.
Yeah. All right, let's move along here to the next question. Okay, so we're going to move over to the rapid fire style questions here, David.
Yeah.
First question. One decision that changed everything.
I think jumping into my first startup in 1996, I got the bug, I got the fire, I got the, magic in my eyes and said, this is what I want.
Okay. One tool that your AI tool that you actually use.
I'm using it primarily for research, as a research tool. So when I'm writing an article, I wrote an article about the Loom versus the AI in terms of employment potential disruption for millions and millions of people. So I use it to research the Loom. I do use it for some writing and editing because I'm dyslexic and I don't always see what I write. And then I am using it increasingly for productivity. And I also use it to, it's very specific, right? I use it to write a survey for me. Again, they're my questions. I'm not asking it to write the questions, but it's cleaning up my document. So
one underrated opportunity.
Again, I think longevity is a big deal. And I know that's sort of out of left field, but this field is taking off, in a big way, and there are so many innovations happening around it. I also feel, again, I think about the startup. I've been playing around with this mobility app because we have 45 million Americans who are impaired in some way, and it's very difficult to navigate the world without, more guidance. So those are two opportunities.
Those are big ones, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Advice to a founder building a company in Maine today.
Well, again, I'll say it over and over again. Focus, right, is really important. I think another aspect, which I don't think is used quite enough, I think that, entrepreneurs need to pull in people like you and me and others to help them and teach them and guide them and befriend them in a way to help make them successful. I think the other advice I would give, and I learned this the hard way, is, money is great, but, be careful who you take it from. At CashStar, I took $10 or $12 million at a very high valuation from a venture firm, private equity firm. And the guy was a new partner and he wanted to prove himself. And he was so focused on the bottom line profitability. It was bad. And so my advice is, ultimately we came to fisticuffs, not physically, but we disagreed on strategy. And I would say just, don't get smitten, with the golden goose, because, just like the story, you may end up, either with no gold or turning to gold yourself. So I would say just be careful. But focus is what I think is very important, more than any single aspect. And then, hire the best damn people you can find. Really important.
That is a great point to end on. Thank you so much, David, for being here. I really appreciate your time and sharing all your insights here. And probably could have talked to you for another hour, but we'll cut it here short. And thanks everybody for listening to the Established Podcast. David, really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. All right. Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Established Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review in the App Store, and share the show with friends, colleagues, and on social. Together, we can help more innovators become established. We'll be back with another conversation soon.